Sabrina 90s comic issue 10. We start out with Sabrina asking Harvey what's wrong, and he says that he's got a big test tomorrow and can't understand geometry. He can't tell the difference between a parallelogram and a hypotenuse, somehow. The former of which is basically a rectangle, but it looks different. How can that be confused with the other thing? Sabrina shows faith in him, and he gets worried. Then some girl says the bullshit that we only use a small portion of our brain power, and it's so perfect that one of the idiotic Shallow Me girls was given that line. Amy makes fun of Harvey, so Sabrina uses magic to make her constantly laugh like a donkey. Sabrina tells Harvey that she's heard fish is brain food, so he agrees, which gives him a scientific explanation he can cling on to explain Sabrina using her magic to make him a genius. So she can use magic to give someone knowledge that even she doesn't know? I wish it was explained that magic has a mind of its own, and so it can tap into all knowledge ever. So that's how I can do the spell for her, making Harvey even smarter than her. But then why doesn't magic always correctly follow the witch's intent if it's omniscient like that? Just to troll them? The librarian hears her casting the spell, but just tells her that this is a library. And Sabrina lies that she was just reciting some poetry. The next day, Harvey tells her that he's gotten an A+. Of course, he says it must be the fish, and wants to get some more. Days later, he thanks Sabrina, and says that the fish really did the trick as he uses overly big words. First off, if he was really made a genius, he'd figure out Sabrina's a witch. But I guess this proves that his memories of supernatural stuff have been erased, because he would remember them and figure out what it really means if he was actually smart. He'd become too genre savvy. Even LCH had Grounder become super genre savvy when he became a genius, and it led to him being a huge threat to Sonic. Instead, he thinks the fish, mere fish, was responsible for turning him into an outright genius. If he was a genius, he'd know that you don't become a genius just from eating a few fish sticks. So the spy witches have to be making sure his genius doesn't result in him getting suspicious of Sabrina. I hate that this comic makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist talking about spy witches that were never shown, but that's the only way the comic can make sense. Or maybe that's a part of Sabrina's spell by accident that he doesn't get suspicious. More importantly, if Harvey was really smart, he'd know it's stupid to use a bunch of big words around people who might not understand them, and make a fool out of himself. He's only gained intelligence in some areas. He's good at school, but not common sense. But to be fair, all she wanted was for him to be great at school. So that's all that happened. Having a great vocabulary could mean he'd be great at English class, so that became part of the requirement of the spell. Then the next day, Harvey continues making an idiot of himself in the story about him being turned into a genius. He expects the principal to make positive change after the teachers gave incorrect information to the class. And the principal says that they are just simple mistakes. But he doesn't promise to change things so that the correct information will be given, so he's an idiot too. Harvey again acts like an idiot by insulting the teachers in front of them, when they won't change anything. And he's still in a good mood after one of them clearly wants to beat him up, when a non-idiot will be put on edge. And because bullshit, Sabrina's spell doesn't get rid of the spell, because God forbid the story end here. God forbid and move on to something else. Sabrina shouldn't be here yet then. Harvey hears what Sabrina said, and despite being made a genius, he doesn't get offended at the fact that she's saying she wants him to be dense again. Instead, he just says that she's making poetry and is distracted and happy because he made a pun, acting like an idiot instead of a smart person, who would realize that she was right and have actual self-awareness. I don't remember Harvey normally having no common sense like this, so that's not a normal part of his character. It's not like he started out like this and just became better at school. But if the story just left it at that, Sabrina wouldn't be given a reason to undo the spell that changed the status quo. It was inevitable that she would want to do this for Harvey, so they had to write the story because it had come up eventually. But this isn't a natural way to excuse her wanting to undo the spell. He's not always insulting people. A natural way would be that his good grades would mean that he's being considered by a different college from Sabrina's that would never accept her. It'd be selfish of Sabrina to undo the spell for that, but it wouldn't be the first time she's been selfish. And it would definitely not be the first time she's been possessive of him. Then we see the teachers protesting over Harvey, rather than expelling him. This panel is clearly just meant to be funny from how outlandish it is. But I'm just wondering why people with authority over him aren't using it. If Harvey was actually made a genius, he would not care about this. and he won't gross out Sabrina with a fish shake of his. He says that he's interviewing for new teachers, all Ivy Leaguers. Then there's a brief comedy page, where Hilda says to Zelda that she's been on the ski trip for 2 days and they still haven't met any guys. Zelda zaps up a tree for guys to run into so that they can talk to them, and the only way there's any room for humor is that the guy is still able to talk afterwards. I'm just thinking about how lethal this would actually be. On the bright side, they're witches, so they can just use magic to heal their injuries and make them unable to question it right away. But then we should have been shown them doing that instead of them looking like selfish sociopaths, which is not a route that this franchise would benefit from going down with them. Anyways, we see Hilda shocked at learning that Sabrina used her magic to make Harvey smart. Hilda says that she deserves this for messing with someone's mind, in a very specific way that's not memory erasing, which is just fine with them. Hilda says the bullshit that Sabrina's made Harvey's brain so powerful that it's able to protect itself from her spell, because the brain is an amazing piece of machinery. Bullshit. I would have enjoyed a story where Harvey became smart, so it's too bad I didn't get to see one. Hilda uses her magic to levitate the magic book to her and reads the solution. If the person's brain is distracted by trying to solve a different problem, it might allow Sabrina to undo the spell. Okay, Harvey wasn't aware that Sabrina was saying a spell that would undo his genius, so I don't even know how the brain knew to protect itself in the first place. It's not explained that he knows she's a witch and what she's trying to do now, and is also smart enough to know that he can't tell her or she'll erase his memory. And he's not a witch himself. Sabrina points out the good point that Harvey's so smart now that what could be too difficult for him? Good point. Logically, they would have run into a wall here. The writer wrote himself into a corner. Zelda can't think of a really complex problem, which is a shame. This would have been the perfect opportunity to take advantage of Zelda's unique character as a genius, which has been the case since the start of the sitcom. And if this comic wants to be its own separate thing, then why in the world does it advertise the sitcom on every cover, to the point of having off-putting pictures of the live-action Sabrina on it? They're aware of it, but don't want to make Zelda like the show one? The problem is, there isn't even anything to fill the void. The two ants seem identical as people. It's not like Hilda and Zelda are versus characters. And that'd be just needlessly confusing anyways, because they already look nothing like how they're supposed to, only having the species right. It would just come off as them giving the names to the wrong characters. Zelda can't come up with a really complex solution, and she could have after a time skip. She could have helped end the story in a natural way, although we're far past natural at this point. Salem says, "Don't look at me, Mensa's not knocking at my door." I read that some people just buy their way into Mensa. Zelda has faith in Sabrina of all people to come up with something that would work, thinking that she's bright. She really doesn't know her. Well, I like that she has star and moon-shaped earrings. It goes well with her being a witch. Sabrina says that Harvey's practically psychedelic by comparison to her, and Salem says, like, cool, man. The kind of typical random humor he often had in the show, where I wondered if being at Cat so long was driving him insane. Really, he's just joking around because he's that desperate for entertainment. The next day, we see that Harvey has taken the place of Sabrina's teacher. At least the comic is accurate by showing different teachers for Sabrina depending on the subject, instead of just one teacher being focused on. Harvey says that Sabrina missed a good part of his lecture on the human heart and circulatory system, as I wonder how he was legally allowed to teach the class. I wish I knew why Sabrina was late. She thinks, the heart! He makes it sound so mechanical. I wonder. Then, I think I know where this is going. She asks Harvey what is love, and Harvey struggles to answer, which no actual genius would. He says that it's a mental process, or possibly a chemical reaction. Why doesn't he just say it's both? Rick would say the answer immediately. Then he struggles some more, finally saying that love is a strong feeling between two people. Sabrina thinks that even the greatest minds find love hard to define. Bullshit. This is reminding me of that bullshit episode of Fairly Odd Parents where they portrayed smart people as incapable of understanding love and human emotions. Not just being sociopaths, but not even understanding them. And made it extremely clear that the writer of that episode was an idiot. Not just in that one context, but in general, an idiot. Because they won't see smart people as the other in a group they aren't a part of otherwise, and portray them like they aren't even people. Rick Sanchez is evil, but it's not like he doesn't understand emotions. He has them all the time. He gets enthusiastic and loud and he's hedonistic, And he also wants to get revenge? He comes off as heartless because he's nihilistic because he knows there's an infinite amount of everyone, so he can use that as an excuse to believe that nothing bad that happens really matters, and so nothing he does that's bad really matters. It's more like a coping mechanism against his own potential guilt so that he won't care as much, but he wouldn't need such a coping mechanism if he had nothing to try to cope with in the first place. He's nihilistic because of what he knows, but he believes it because he needs to cope with the fact that he has emotions in the first place and doesn't want to care. My point is, it doesn't say anything good about the writer right here if they think this makes sense. Or they didn't catch the unfortunate implications of the story if he wrote them by accident. Obviously, most smart people aren't like this, and being a genius doesn't make you unable to understand and explain emotion. We have neuroscientists and psychologists. I'm pretty sure they're geniuses. They could explain love for hours. He basically explained it right here anyways. It's hormones, dopamine, a biological way to force procreation and the raising of children and the seeking out of a cure for loneliness, for all of the advantages of being with other people. And I used a few big words right there. A moron couldn't. You'd have to be not a complete moron to be able to scientifically explain love. Or anything else. It's no different than anything. This story comes off like the writer's never met a smart person before. It wouldn't be so bad if we saw other geniuses in this story. That guy from Archie. Dilton, or whatever he's called. He could have been a part of the story, because we saw Archie and one of them no problem. He would have defined it just fine. He's being an idiot. Apparently, the spell Sabrina casts defined a smart person as an idiot who somehow holds onto a huge vocabulary and the knowledge needed to have great grades. Sabrina returns Harvey to normal, complete with him not remembering what he was just doing, and he still says that he was turned into a jerk. The phrasing is pretty bad though, as he blames the smartness for it. I hope this panel isn't trying to imply that this is the actual legitimate message of the story. It's a problem when you're only getting the perspective of a few characters for something like this, and all of the characters are wrong. Harvey says that he'll just have to work harder to improve his study habits. Then he gets served some fish sandwiches and runs away screaming, learning the bad lesson that he should never eat fish again. This story was problematic, to say the least. I don't know what the writer was thinking when he thought the story was acceptable. It's offensive to people who are actually smart. It would make sense if Harvey was a jerk to start with, but he was always known for being a nice guy. And I shouldn't have to say this, but niceness and smartness are two separate things. Knowing a lot does make you a lot more likely to be bitter, which can make you look like a jerk, because you know how much happens that sucks and how many people are jerks. But it makes you bitter because you care that the world sucks. Otherwise, you'd just be happy about it out of sadism, or not react to it at all because you don't have emotions to start with. And obviously, it's smarter to be polite. The story isn't even explaining that Sabrina's magic made Harvey that way because she genuinely believed that this is how smart people are. But that would reflect really badly on her. And her magic has to be doing this with a mind of its own because it's able to give him knowledge that she doesn't have. So that can't be it. In the next story, we see an old lady break the fourth wall, telling the audience, who she assumes are all children, that this is Crystal Lake, where she was banished years ago by a curse for her evil deeds. And now this place is a ski community, so she's been waiting for the day that another witch arrives that she gets to take the place of. Did I read this before? It seems familiar, like that Golden Knight. It's weird that a comic featuring nothing but teenage main characters was written with the assumption that only kids were part of its audience. She looks through a crystal ball at Harvey and Sabrina. Harvey's optimistic, saying that this class ski trip is cool, and Sabrina makes a pun saying that she's cold. I guess it's impossible for her to cast a spell to feel warmer because she's too focused on how cold she is to think about being warm. And if she created fire near her, people would see it, so she could only hide it for so long. I'm wondering if a high school class having a ski trip is realistic, though. I've never heard of that. And I don't see any real educational value in it. What in the world? The old lady from the first panel is working at the registration desk? She was banished here for her evil deeds. I thought she'd be trapped in a house all day, under house arrest, with witches teleporting food to her to feed her. Instead she's got a job like a normal person. Who hired her? It makes sense that she'd have to work to get food for herself, actually. It'd be more of a punishment for her than not having to work at all. It's fascinating that this is how she's being punished instead of her being put in a prison or executed or brainwashed to be a good person. There's tons of different punishments for crimes all over the world. So this could make sense.
So, is there a magic barrier that makes it impossible for her to leave the small area she's in? And that's why she has the hope a witch will come to her? It must be. We're probably supposed to just assume that. She must not be able to go out into the city or town, or she'd have met Sabrina already. I guess the point of the first panel spoiling her true nature was to build suspense, and it worked. But the comic does that just fine anyways by having her be a creepy old lady who tells the students not to be scared, and is amused that Sabrina got the room key of number 13. Harvey says it's great that Sabrina gets a room all to herself, being an optimist again, in spite of Sabrina's nervous reaction. To be fair, normally he'd be the smart one here, while Sabrina would just be superstitious over the number 13, which doesn't even make sense. Sabrina wonders why she was given a room far away from everyone else, and it's a room with a spider hanging from a web near the door. She opens the door and asks, "Whoa, who decorated this place? The Bride of Frankenstein?" She's actually in the show at one point. The crone, who we don't even get the name of yet, when that first panel could have told us that, welcomes Sabrina to her humble abode. Sabrina states the obvious, "Hey, you're the lady from the front desk." And I actually found it kind of funny that she quipped, "Oh, you're a sharp one." Sabrina gets forced to sit in a chair, which traps her in it. And she says that it's her favorite armchair. That was a good pun. It's not just there for dialogue that tries to be funny. It's actually a part of the story, so it contributes. But I'm just wondering how the hell a witch who was banished has any kind of magical artifacts around her when she's supposed to be on her house arrest. I can only assume that a witch with these artifacts obliviously left them behind at the ski resort. This isn't her ski resort, so if this was actually her chair, why would she have her chair here? I can understand the amulet because it can be carried in your hand, concealed. But why would she have the chair? Maybe a burglar stole them from a witch and sold them to her for money without knowing any better. She might have paid someone to do it who went to the ski resort. I wish that was explained. It does make me feel smart being able to figure out the answers to these unanswered questions. For all we know, that was the answer, and we were supposed to just assume this kind of stuff. But I'd much rather the story actually show me that my assumption is correct, because that means the writer was proving he was smart enough to think of the questions and answer them just right, and put in the extra effort to have the story make sense. Speaking of assumptions, why won't a spy witch save Sabrina? The witch would see this and come save her right away, unless he was in the bathroom and missed this. But that's why I always imagine there's more than one spy witch at once watching a witch, just in case. Spy witches have to be a thing in this universe, because how could Sabrina and her aunt alone have erased the memories of supernatural stuff of everyone who's in cars and saw her in a flying car? She never saw all of those people personally, and that was a lot of people. For there to not be any consequences to the obvious magic, there has to be witches spying on it to maintain the masquerade. So the only explanation I can think of for why they aren't going to save Sabrina is that they're curious and want to see how this goes, just like the audience. So they watch Sabrina stare at an amulet that'll conveniently transfer her soul into the crone and vice versa. At least it explains that they've switched souls, not brains. Which would be more confusing as the Sonic X comic showed. That, and maybe the spy witches hate the crone enough that they want her to cause trouble, so it can be caught on camera, so she can be prosecuted for it. If they stopped her the second that Sabrina was trapped in the chair, they'd have no legal excuse to outright punish the crone. They'd just take away the chair and amulet. So maybe they want the crone to do stuff to condemn herself, so they'll have an excuse to punish her way worse because she somehow got a lenient deal. Maybe she had a really good lawyer and family, and the spies aren't happy with it. It's fun to come up with these explanations of my own, but it's also stressful that it's not being confirmed as soon as possible. Why should I have faith that this comic will explain this when it didn't show us any spies before? Maybe the spy witches aren't seeing this because there's no mortals in the room. I have to assume based on the first panel that she knows Sabrina's a witch already because of the crystal ball she stared into. And she saw her use magic, as apparently, psychic power is a separate thing from regular magic in this world, that can't be removed with it. And so she was still able to scry with the crystal ball, just like how Hilda and Zelda were still able to communicate telepathically with Salem, even if their magic was restricted. I really wish I knew why she had this amulet. Even Sonic Boom explained this plot a little better. A magical meteor crashed, and Sonic and Eggman just found it. In the Sonic X comic, it was an invention that Eggman just invented. But it's not a Deus Ex Machina, because I know there could be a perfectly logical explanation for why it was made. It's an illegal magical artifact that a witch who was here before left behind. If it was an amulet of the crone, well, I refuse to buy that because the witches would have searched all of her belongings for magic and disabled it after she got in trouble, and obviously not kept her in her own home from before. She was banished. That means she was sent away from where she used to live. Why would she get to keep all of her possessions? That's not what criminals get to do. My point is, I'm willing to look forward to and accept this premise because it can make it make sense. It's still an exciting, intense idea for a story. Of course, it's also so overpowered that I'm guessing it'll be resolved easily with no lasting consequences because this comic thankfully has the good sense to be lighthearted in tone, which is the lifeblood of Sabrina's unique appeal. So it's not going to be too scary. Sabrina will get back to normal and she'll erase the memories of everyone who was made bitter with her because of this. I wouldn't like it any other way. And I can't help but sort of root for this villain right now because I understand why she'd want to escape from a place she was banished to and get to live an actual life. She has a great motivation already. I wouldn't be rooting for her if I knew what evil deed she was banished for. And by rooting for her, I mean I wish they could both be happy. It would be great if there was self-aware writing where she said, "Of course I know you're a witch. Your name's Spellman." Instead, it's too confusing. Because convoluted nonsense, it turns out that she still has powers, and they're just greatly reduced, diminished. Huh? Why didn't she get the punishment Salem had? I guess I'm expected to believe that witches have so much magic that even for a witch, it's impossible to remove all of a witch's magic. Even though it was done on the show multiple times just fine, we saw it get put in a jar. But that's a different continuity. You'd think Enchanter the head witch would be able to completely depower someone just fine. But I guess that's just not how it works. Fine, maybe that would make sense. Salem can still communicate with Hilda and Zelda telepathically. I don't even know how you visualize someone losing all their powers anyways. Visualizing an absence of something would be hard. You can't imagine someone trying to use every possible spell and failing. That'd take an eternity, and you'd inevitably miss one even if you were following protocol and run down the entire list. You could imagine someone pointing and then not doing any magic. Even if you imagine someone saying, "I lost all my powers," won't that just have only that happen? And they just say that, but still have their powers? Well, magic can access knowledge outside of its user. So it's smart enough to figure out what you really want. Most of the time anyways. And it's somehow only powerful enough to drain most of someone's magic. I guess she used to be one of the witches who'd be as powerful as Enchantra, the most powerful witch ever. We see that after she was banished here by the Witches' Council, she had to walk through the snow in just a blue cloak. I guess she didn't have to walk very far or she would have frozen to death. They did this to be cruel, but were nice enough to have her live a normal life instead of being in a prison with people. If this was a certain death trap and she survived, you'd think they would have had a more guaranteed death trap. I love that's actually called the Witches' Council like in the show, but I don't get the lack of an apostrophe. And I really hate that I'm not being told what her evil deeds were. I assume her evil deeds are so evil that they aren't family friendly to mention. The comic's characters say the word kill, but there's another special kind of evil. She could say that she was being punished for using a love spell on someone, and it could be thrown back in Sabrina's face that she tried to do that, and she'd apologize and feel guilty. She says that it was rude of her to not explain herself first, and it's certainly polite of her to explain, but she must be in a hurry because she doesn't feel like explaining what her past evil deeds were. She brags that Sabrina will be the one trapped at Crystal Lake forever. Witches can live forever? Even if they're immortal, you'd think that inevitably a witch would get killed from an accident because the longer you live, the more potential bad things you manage to avoid. She might have a heart attack or trip and die eventually. I guess the crone is just exaggerating to be dramatic. Why don't we know her name yet? She was polite enough to explain her backstory a tiny bit, but not enough to say her name? Sabrina says that she's not that fond of skiing. Oh, because convoluted nonsense, it turns out that out of nowhere, there's one stipulation. Crone has to get a guy who loves her to kiss her to make the switch permanent. Maybe the amulet was made with good intentions in the hopes that love would reform criminals. But unfortunately, no matter how abusive someone is, there is someone out there who would date them anyways. So Sabrina's being pretty naive when she says that no one will love her. Crone says that Harvey's kiss would work. I don't see why it would. I don't see why she'd think it would. He thinks that she's Sabrina. He doesn't love her. Why would the amulet be programmed so that it would be that easy? Wouldn't it have the stipulation in the first place to force someone to be loved for who they are first? So that there would be even a chance of them becoming good? I assumed that the body-switching amulet was made as an illegal artifact for witches to take advantage of for themselves for nefarious purposes. Who would make it like this when that would just hinder whoever wanted to abuse it? If all Crone will have to do is get a kiss from someone who loves her body and not the real her, That'd be a really easy stipulation the Witches' Council put on all those amulets to get around. For example, if someone used this amulet to switch bodies with a president to take over a country, they just have to get the president's wife to kiss them. So it can't be the Witches' Council. Instead, it's a stipulation made by a really naive person who thought that anyone who's loved by someone must be good enough that they deserve to get to steal someone else's life, and that the amulet is worth making. Maybe it was a way to give suffering people in general a way out for a better life. And they think the ends justify the means here, and assume it would usually result in a better life. And she happened to get her hands on it when she's not supposed to because she's a criminal. Still, someone incredibly irresponsible made this amulet and didn't think it through at all, to the point of not thinking to make her unable to take advantage of this illegal loophole. I guess the person who made the amulet didn't consider that the person they'd switch bodies with would already have a boyfriend. Harvey asks not Sabrina why she's on Black Diamond Trail when she's a novice. Harvey asks if she's okay because he knows her well enough to think she's acting out of character when she says she couldn't stand being away from him. He's also smart enough to be suspicious because she asks for a kiss and talks in baby talk. He says that she must be oxygen deprived, but of course wants to kiss her anyways because that's his girlfriend and he's lonely. I'm guessing that something will come and surprise her to explain why she won't easily take over Sabrina's life and buy Sabrina some time. Just before she's able to kiss him, she's called Crone instead of Old Lady for some reason. As if Crone is literally her name, and Hilda knew her name. She was the one who called out to her. Who uses the word Crone, let alone casually? She magically turned her back to normal, and Harvey screams and says that he must be oxygen deprived, so he runs away. Hilda the Deus Ex Machina saves the day without Sabrina having to do anything at all when I was looking forward to seeing her earn getting back to normal. There's a reason I didn't remember this conclusion to the story when I read it again. Fortunately, Zelda explained that they were watching Witchcraft's Most Wanted, and they happened to run a story on Crone, so they thought she would be in trouble. And I guess the comic didn't have enough space to show them finding that out. That would be showing plot developments twice. Why is she considered most wanted when she was banished here, so this is where she's supposed to be? It would have made sense if the TV show was instead about witches who were banished. She's not a fugitive. But that could have easily been fixed with a dialogue change. This kinda makes sense. They just decided to do an episode on someone who was already bound and charged and banished somewhere so they could spice things up. Zelda's got her amulet now, and she was fortunate enough to come here under the assumption that she would have had an amulet like this. Maybe she already knows amulets like this are a thing, and it pays to be careful. They have to have come here knowing about the amulet. Or rather, a whole series of amulets if they already knew it worked like this. Or else when they saw Sabrina trying to kiss Harvey, they'd just shrug it off. I mean, they'd have to know that Sabrina was going to a ski trip because they're her aunts, they live with her. The story ends with Crone kicking the TV, cursing that darn television show, and lying that she's canceling her cable. No way she'd keep that up, so she's delusional. Is Crone seriously her actual name? She didn't change it? Maybe that's just the name given to her by the TV show and general public. Otherwise, her parents must have hated her. In the next story, Sabrina says with a nice new hat that she's off to do some Christmas shopping. The teenager of the house is gonna go do that? Hilda asks why she doesn't just zap up the presents in pre-wrapped packages at the last minute like her and Zelda always do. How does the economy on the witch world even work? Witches wouldn't have to pay for a lot of goods because they could just zap them up. And they can use magic to give other people skills even they don't have, so they wouldn't have to pay for a lot of services either. I guess they pay for the services when they're too lazy to use magic for them. Sabrina says that she could never zap up the presents because half the fun of Christmas shopping is all the holiday hustle and bustle. She just likes it because she's used to it and can't imagine any other way, but she's not being smart here. Zelda uses magic to immediately decorate the Christmas tree, and Sabrina snarks about it, some Christmas spirit. I'm out of here. Sabrina's gotten Harvey a sweater at the mall, and Salem some books, not that we know what books they even are to give him more character. Sabrina thinks that because Hilda and Zelda can zap anything up, that takes all the fun out of shopping for them. And she doesn't just ask them what they want. She wishes they weren't sitting at home missing out, and then she gets an idea. She comes home, and Hilda brags that Sabrina has barely anything, while they could have zapped up gifts for half of Nebraska. That'd be pretty charitable of them. Sabrina gives Hilda and Zelda some gifts a week before Christmas. She gives Hilda the root of a rare tree with a weird name. Zelda asks why that sounds familiar, and Sabrina says that she read about it in the magic book. Once the root of that tree is touched, it robs witches of their powers for a week. So she did that to her own aunts. At least her intention was good. She wanted them to have fun doing the holidays the mortal way. I guess that particular tree is from the other realm. I was satisfied that Hilda said, "You're getting grounded for this one, young lady." Too bad Sabrina is still smiling as if it was worth it. It was inconsiderate to do that to her aunts just because they weren't seeing things her way on one thing. Is this gonna be the excuse for why her aunts will start insisting on not using magic? Because at least one of them grew to prefer the hard work? If so, at least there would be an explanation. It makes sense that they would prefer a little hard work to feel content and fulfilled. Because I can imagine all they do is watch TV all day. Because if they had a job, they wouldn't have been able to stop Crone. The next morning, Sabrina gets some karma because she's woken up at 6 AM just so that her aunts could tell her that they're leaving for a crack of dawn sale. They're looking for bargains since they have to use cash. Is it even realistic for a store to have a sale at that time of the day? Aren't the stores closed at this point? Of course, Hilda has to rush through the huge crowd of people. And Hilda's happy because she found a blouse that's not only within their budget, but is just the right size for her aunt. A woman steals it from her, insisting that she saw it first even though she's right behind her. Hilda can't do anything about it because she's not a witch right now. I hope she'll get hers eventually though. I was gonna compliment this panel on showing the start of how Hilda would believably see how fun Christmas shopping could be, proving Sabrina right, and then this happened. I didn't expect it to be that cruel. It's a 99% off sale. With all this, maybe the store is really desperate for sales and attention. Cause I don't think a sale like this would ever happen. Hilda complains that in the good old days, she'd have turned that woman to a chimp. Days later, Sabrina sees her aunts exhausted on the couch from holiday preparation, with Hilda's feet in a water bowl because they're sore, and Zelda having a cold compress on her head. Hilda says interestingly that her feet haven't been this sore since she was in a dance marathon with a clumsy six-legged Neptunian. I prefer to think she means a Neptunian from the other realm, from a Neptune that's actually inhabitable. Since if Neptune, the gas giant, had people living on it, the mortals of Earth would know. And we haven't seen any aliens on Earth at this point. Zelda says that she thought that alien was handsome, which makes me wish we got to see what Hilda was referencing even more. Too bad the artist got lazy instead. Zelda complains about having to do all the cooking for the relatives coming over tomorrow, and Sabrina fortunately offers to help. The next day, Hilda says they got everything done. The story cuts past the party that they're complimented for, which was being built up to, and Zelda says that it feels great that they did it. Hilda of all people admits that doing the holidays the mortal way was invigorating. Fortunately, they get their revenge because Sabrina's tricked into touching a Y-root herself, although they at least cared about her enough to make it in the shape of a cute kitten for her. The story ends with her being asked to clean up. I'm fine with her getting punished in this story because she really did something that the aunts had a reason to make a big deal out of, as opposed to punishing her for something that really doesn't matter because she was already punished enough. Like for a mistake she must have already learned a lesson from. The first story was by Bill Gallagher, and was about Sabrina casting a spell on Harvey to make him able to get better grades. But somehow, even though that was all she wanted, the spell made him a jerk who was an idiot most of the time, being stupid enough to think making enemies out of his teacher would be just fine, when he's not normally a jerk. It's an arbitrary excuse to force her to want to undo the spell, and because of the lack of good geniuses, and him saying that smartness made him a jerk, the story comes off as having an anti-intellectual message, which is sickening and alienating. Why was Harvey immune to her magic? That made no sense, and considering what came after that, it wasn't worth the padding. With the exception of his better grades and vocabulary, the plot would have been exactly the same with a few dialogue changes if the spell made Harvey an idiot, because the whole plot was that he had no common sense. I shouldn't have to explain this, but being smart doesn't mean you have no people skills. People skills is smart too. I didn't know it was possible to screw up writing a character becomes a genius. Even the Archie Sonic comic did this better, because while Tails did become a jerk, he was actually smart, and competent because of it. There's more to being a smart person than having good grades, which also requires the motivation to work hard to get an A+. At least Tails was smart enough to make a machine. The best he could make was a fish shake. People who really care about making smart decisions most of the time would not make enemies out of people with authority over them and risk getting expelled. So actually smart people aren't like this. Harvey would know how to define love just fine. If that was the best solution they could come up with, they should have just let Sabrina win when she wanted to. This plot would have made more sense if Harvey was a jerk to begin with. Like if this was Reggie, it'd be totally in character. But instead he's defined by being nice in the show. And the writer should have known that intelligence doesn't make your entire personality do a 180. How did that happen when Sabrina would have never wanted that? And she never says that she thinks this is how all smart people are. I guess all the stories were by the same writer. The second story had an interesting premise where a villain body swaps with Sabrina and almost takes over her life. But I had to fill in all of the blanks myself because the writer made no effort to explain it. So I had no idea why a banished criminal who lost her powers would still have access to a literal armchair and a body-swapping amulet. And somehow there was a stipulation where Crone could only permanently save Sabrina if she tricked Harvey into kissing her, while thinking she was Sabrina. So yeah, that stipulation wasn't thought out by the amulet maker. Why don't she have it instead of a spy witch finding out that she got these things and immediately getting rid of them? I guess they were left here by a witch by mistake and nobody bothered to check to see if they had magic. But a spy supervising Crone would have seen the moment she found out they were magical. I guess she didn't have any supervision. Instead of a spy witch saving Sabrina, Hilda does because she knows to stop her from kissing Harvey conveniently, having watched a TV show about fugitives and not prisoners that conveniently talked about Crone of all people. It'd make more sense if Hilda knew Crone personally. We really should have seen them find out about Crone. I can't believe we don't even know Crone's real name, let alone what evil deeds she even did. This was an exciting and interesting story, but ended way too early because it wrote itself into a corner and had to end really early because of the stipulation thing and Harvey being right here. So we barely got to see the concept actually being used. Sonic Comics did it better. Like, this didn't make any sense. The final story was easily the best one. Sabrina likes Christmas shopping, so she uses a magical root that she found out about from the magic book to depower her aunts for a week, so they can learn the satisfaction of hard work preparing for the holidays like a normal family, which she's actually used to. Unfortunately, she's punished and scolded repeatedly for it. I would say she betrayed them, but it was only really temporary, and she did it with good intentions, so it can't really count. It was good, but I hated that we never got to see that lady get punished for stealing a shirt Hilda wanted. It was just needlessly mean to show that. And it's not like Hilda is the kind of person you'd want to see punished, although she is kind of morally dubious like in the show, because she considered turning her into a chimp, so it was a good thing that she didn't have magic at that point. She still should have punished her, but not in an over-the-top way.